Today, we are breaking down the entire New England Patriots 2025 NFL draft class. I am joined by Daniel of Scouted NFL. Daniel, say hi to the people, and let's jump right into Will Campbell.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and break down the Patriots.
Yes, sir. So you are primarily on a website as well as X, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, you can find
Awesome.
me at Scouted NFL or scoutednfl.com.
Even better. I mean, the website's great. So if you guys want to see that, he always keeps it up to date. Graphic design background that I do not have. But let's get right into this. Will Campbell, the fourth overall pick. A lot of controversy because, there's all the memes that are edited of him having shorter arms than I do because I have T-Rex length arms. And it's like, it's funny. It's funny, right? But he has great movement skills. He has multiple years of experience in the SEC. Short arms are not the end all be all. Makes it more challenging. But for you, was that the pick that you're kind of hoping for, or did you just kind of accept it and, it's a good player?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on in the process, myself included and a lot of other Patriots fans, we were kind of fixated on the Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter wave. And obviously that's what we were hoping for. And early on, it seemed somewhat realistic that two quarterbacks could go. But as we got farther and farther along in the process, that dream kind of died down a little bit. And you were left looking at the other options. And the reality of this draft was that it just wasn't as stacked at the top as you would like it to be for a team drafting there compared to years past. And I just think when you look at the alternative options, it did make sense that it was going to be Will Campbell. Like you said, it's not ideal to draft an outlier at 4 in terms of arm length, but it's also not the end all be all. And I think when you're looking at that outlier skill set, you're also looking for other things. You're looking for, like you said, the athleticism. How hard is he going to work? What's he going to do to prepare for these guys and potentially overcome some of these limitations? And I think when you look at those things with Will Campbell, they all check out. And so I do believe that those things will be able to kind of compensate the short arm length deficiencies. And I think also you want guys that are going to fit from a culture standpoint. And, obviously you want to draft good players at the end of the day, but this was someone who I think Mike Vrabel just had a lot of trust in, who he wanted in his building, who he believed was kind of going to be a torchbearer for this program. And also just a massive position of need. So I think all things considered, it was definitely the sensible pick and one that I've kind of turned a corner and I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, the moment he said, "I'm gonna fight and die for Drake May," I'm like, I'm sold. Like initially, I was like, "All right, I'm giving this like a C plus, B minus. Like I'm happy with it, just not like blown away." But the moment you start hearing stuff like that, I'm like, "All right, you know what? Like there's something beyond the tape that this guy brings to the table, and that's something that you need, especially on the offensive line that doesn't have a clear leader. I mean, Morgan Moses is turning to dust soon, but I mean, you need somebody to carry the torch, like you said. Number 38, Trey Henderson. Really good compliment to Ramondre Stevenson, in my opinion. Someone who showed time and time again that on limited touches, he can have almost unlimited potential. And I love seeing that. Maybe not going to be the bell cow back, but the NFL right now kind of thrives on either the elite 3-down backs or really damn good committees. And I think that you guys are developing a very strong one there. With Trey Henderson, I think it takes off a lot of the stress from Drake May as well, having to deal with a developing offensive line. What were your thoughts on Trey Henderson, and were you happy that y'all were staying around that spot?
Yeah, this was a super interesting pick. I think in a vacuum, when I was looking at this pick live and just seeing what we had already addressed, I honestly wasn't too happy about it just because I wanted a pass catcher at that point. I felt like there were other guys on the board who, maybe could benefit this team a little bit more. But as the day went on and I saw Kyle Williams and Jared Wilson go off the board to us, which we'll get to soon, I thought the Patriots did a really excellent job kind of reading the board and seeing where guys were going to go. And that really made this pick worth it. And so I kind of came back to it and I was like, okay, I really do like this. Travion Henderson, he's one of those rare backs where all the things that typically keep a rookie off the field in their first year, those are the things that Travion Henderson is actually really good at.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has kind of highlighted the pass protection abilities, which are truly phenomenal on tape, like a rare guy who can really add to your offensive line and really be that reliable guy, but also just not fumbling. And so those little things that, Ramondre Stevenson has had a lot of issues with in the past couple of years, he's going to be able to step in and you're not going to really have to worry about it. So I really love the pick in that sense. I also just think when you look at what Josh McDaniels wants out of a running back, he's really utilized a lot of these kind of scat back, James White, Rex Burkhead types.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Travion Henderson, he offers that skill set but he's also big and physical enough and a good enough runner between the tackles where he can stay on the field for almost every single down. And like you said, he might not be a bell cow, but I think there's just going to be so many different ways to use him. And it's such a perfect scheme fit with McDaniel. So looking at the rest of the board and how it fell and what we were able to acquire in this entire class, I was really excited about the pick.
What I loved about what you said there is that the board fell in a way that it almost seemed like they were tactically choosing and understanding where guys were going to be. And I'm curious if you believe this or if it was kind of BS in your mind. Elliot Wolf talking about this algorithm. I mean, like it seemed like, oh, the algorithm hasn't been in place yet. And I'm like, my guy, like it's kind of your professional, it's your job. Like, how is this not ready yet? And all of a sudden, like we're going from clowning the Patriots drafts to all of a sudden arguably saying that they have the best. And they're sniping guys left, right, and center. Do you think that this might have just been a one-off scenario and maybe, or maybe the previous times were one-off scenarios, maybe got better at drafting? Or do you actually think the algorithm's a legitimate thing?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well. Like when he initially said that, it was kind of difficult to comprehend what he was talking about. And, I think people, including myself, are a little bit skeptical.
Yeah.
But I think if you actually look at it in its essence, it's like Elliot Wolf a year or two ago, he was working under the Belichick regime. That was an entirely different scouting department that had a certain way of doing things. And they had processes that had been in place for tens of years. And so, it takes time to change those things. It takes time to get the guys working under you to work in certain ways and, implement changes into your system. So I do believe that was kind of, probably a big part of this. And I think also another thing that we should probably consider is, I think the draft was a lot different because of Gerard Mayo versus Mike Vrabel as well. I think when you have a coach who kind of knows what he wants, who's been there before, who has a type of player that he's looking for, I think it's a lot easier to kind of communicate with your general manager and, get guys specifically that fit your way of football, which frankly, I don't think Gerard Mayo had in mind.
Fair enough.
So I think Elliot Wolf was really put in a position last year where he was running the entire operation. And, from what I heard, he was even at times dealing with the practices and things that he wouldn't have to want to deal with. So I think it's definitely taken a weight off of his shoulder, having Vrabel in there and being able to communicate with a little bit more of a mature and experienced team.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. I mean, if you think about it, we all have a certain amount of bandwidth, and if you're having to stretch it too much in certain areas that can be pulling you away from things that actually matter with your job, like drafting, I could definitely see how it could slow down the process. But you're just hinting at it. Somehow Kyle Williams slips to 69. This guy was dynamic as all get out in Mobile. You saw it yourself. I saw it myself down there. This guy was damn near unguardable, except for like one rep versus Zaire Thomas. But Kyle Williams, he's excellent. Fell here to 69. What were your thoughts? Did you expect for him to be in this range, or did you have almost a gut feeling that he might have been going way higher than this?
Yeah, I mean, I was very surprised. I think that was part of the reason, like I was saying before, of just why I didn't love the Travion Henderson pick in a vacuum. I thought it was kind of the last opportunity to go get a guy like Kyle Williams or Jalen Noel. I think for me, there was kind of a range of four guys who I was looking at who maybe you could get at 69, being, Jack Bash, Jalen Noel, Trey Harris, Kyle Williams, that group of four guys who I really believed in.
Right.
But as we got closer to the draft, I was kind of thinking you're either going to have to take them at 38 or you're going to have to move up from 69. So when he actually got on the board and Jalen Noel was there as well,
Yeah.
I was very, very surprised. And it kind of made that Travion Henderson pick worth it. But Kyle Williams is, he's elite at his craft. You look at a guy like that and you look at what the Patriots have really been lacking in the last couple of years. And those things are speed, route running, and a guy who can actually create separation on his own. And I think Kyle Williams really excels in those areas. Just the footwork, the release, the full route tree, those type of things that you really want to look for from the start from a wide receiver. Those are really the things that Kyle Williams excels at. So I think he's a perfect scheme fit for McDaniels, and I think he's a hell of a player.
I mean, you add on top of it, this guy broke 20 tackles, if not more, on 70 touches. I mean, he is dynamic after the catch. I mean, just huge fan of what you all were able to do there. I will say, were you surprised that you guys did not double dip at wide receiver and go for more the prototypical X build? I know Caden Prather was a 7th round pick in division to the Bills. Maybe I thought that would have been something that you guys could have thrown a dart at.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I think, there's just so much like not garbage, but just a lot to sort through in our wide receiver room.
Right.
Like a lot of young guys that you really don't know what they're going to be. For me, I was never really high on Jalen Polk, but at the same
Mhm.
time, he's still your 37th overall pick. You're still
Right.
probably expecting something out of him. Javon Baker, same thing. Like I actually was a fan of him,
Yep.
but there's some other issues off field stuff there. But I think you're expecting one of these guys, maybe it's Kayshon Boutte, to take the next step or at least contribute in that kind of X role. So I think that definitely had something to do with it. But yeah, I mean, they could have definitely on day 3 potentially gone with a bigger body receiver. But, I think there's enough guys there where you're looking to sort it out and you don't necessarily want to throw too many darts with what you have.
This is true. Too many cooks in the kitchen doesn't really get anything accomplished. But number 95, what a steal as well. A lot of people were suspecting Jared Wilson to go as high as 50th to the Seattle Seahawks, and he falls all the way to 95. Crazy athlete. Has some of the best highlight reel reps imaginable in this class. I mean, the center class was weak as it is, so it's surprising that in such a depleted class he would slip damn near to the 4th. But on top of that, I mean, the high level reps are incredible. I think his losses are a little bit head scratching. I mean, it's kind of surprising to see such a big chasm between the two, between the highs and the lows. But you guys get to be able to bring in somebody day one who's going to be sitting behind. He's who's your starting center? I'm forgetting off the top of my head.
Garrett Bradbury, yeah.
Garrett Bradbury, right? So you're going to have someone who could sit immediately and learn from a veteran, allow those mistakes to be able to be polished up. But if he needs to start sooner than later, he has the potential to actually make it happen. For the 3rd round, I thought that was excellent. What were your thoughts?
I loved it. Same thoughts as you there. I was expecting Jared Wilson probably to go in that like 60s range. In my official mock draft, I actually had Jared Wilson going to the Patriots at pick 69. So when he got there at 9, or we actually had pick 77 and we traded back, I think twice. So we added, I believe it was a 4th round pick that netted us one of Farmer or Swinson.
Yeah,
So to be able to move back and still kind of get a guy that personally, and I think a lot of other people would have been happy to get at 69,
right.
it was really, really the cherry on top on that day too.
Mm,
But yeah, like you said, I think Jared Wilson, he's kind of one of those guys where he just has rare tools for the center position from a
right.
size, athleticism, movement standpoint. And a guy who's had a lot of success in one of the bigger programs in college football. But I do think, like you said, it's the perfect situation where he's not forced to start right away. Like you have a guy in Garrett Bradbury who can kind of hold down the fort for a little bit if need be, while Jared Wilson potentially learns stuff more on the mental side of things. I think
Mhm.
that's definitely part of it for a center and getting there week 1 as a rookie is just learning the protections and learning the playbook and make sure you've mastered kind of the mental element of things just because of how important the center position is for a quarterback. So I do think it's going to be really beneficial to have a guy like Garrett Bradbury in front of him potentially. And, if he wins the starting job, great for him. If he doesn't, you have a little bit of time to ease him in there and make sure you develop and right. But I think again, just rare tools at the position and super excited about him.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are developing a lot on the offensive line. I mean, we'll talk about Marcus Bryant eventually as well. He was actually someone who's in one of my classes at SMU, so it's just
Wow.
funny to see him go to Missouri and then now to New England. A little bit moving east every time, but I mean, you guys are developing a lot of tools on the offensive line, a lot of players that actually have legitimate high ceilings. It's good to see where you guys are at compared to about a year and a half ago, where there's a lot of doubt overall. But next, we talk about Craig Woodson. And Craig was the last player I graded, and I was so pissed off because this was a man who I fell in love with. He was just one of the most dynamic coverage safeties slash slot corners that I saw in the draft, especially for the value. And there's still areas where he needs to improve. And I think this is a great situation, again, with the quantity of defensive backs and the defensive back room for him to have that mentorship, to gain that extra polish, and for him to actually be a high end starter in the next year or two, in my opinion. What were your thoughts on Craig Woodson? What's your outlook in terms of where he should be?
Yeah. So, Craig Woodson was a guy who I didn't initially do too much work on in the pre draft process. So,
Yeah,
when
same.
we actually picked him, I didn't know much about him.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people were in the same boat where they felt like it was a reach because of that. But again, that never means that it's not a good pick. It just means that you didn't do enough research. So, you know,
Right.
I think, you know, everyone has really, really good things to say about Craig Woodson. And, you know, one thing that stood out was just his versatility. He's
Mm,
played in a lot of different spots, whether that be at both safety positions, whether that be as a nickel. So I think he adds a lot of versatility. He's very experienced, and guys behind the scenes, coaches, all of that, you know, they rave about his character and his work ethic. And so I feel like he was a guy who probably really impressed Mike Vrabel and this coaching staff. And when I think you look at the Patriots state of their roster in that kind of safety group, you have a lot of versatile kind of box type safeties like a Jabril Peppers, like a Kyle Duggar, but you don't really have that more free ranging guy
mm.
who can do it all, who, you know, can be more of a defensive back. So I really like this pick actually. And I think, you know, in the fourth round, if you're potentially just getting a guy that you really feel confident in who has a high floor, I think that's a win.
Yeah, no, Craig Woodson is awesome. I literally ended up seeing, shout out to NFL Draft Files. He's also a similar page to yours that posts a lot of good all 22 clips. He was the one who posted Craig Woodson on one of the final days before the draft. And I'm like, son of a bitch. I like the highlights. I got to go check this guy out. And the thing about Cal is that you saw them compete year after year, and especially this past year, in games that they shouldn't have competed in, even without Jaden Ott being good. They still were competitive. And you look at their whole entire defense, whether I believe it was Marcus Harris, Craig Woodson, Noel Williams, and then Teddy Buchanan. Like there were talent. There was talent littered everywhere. So it's great to see that y'all were able to pick up my favorite of the bunch. And at 106, I thought that was impeccable value. Then we get another player that some guys were even talking about him as a potential fringe one at a little bit at the peak of his hype there. And Josh Farmer, 35-inch arms, damn near. If not, I think he breached 35 inches. And he's a crazy athlete, young guy, really good character. What were your thoughts on getting Josh Farmer to have him sit in the most expensive defensive tackle room in the NFL?
Yeah, I was absolutely pumped about this pick. This is a guy who I forget the exact number. I want to say it was like in the early 70s, late 60s on my board. So when he was sitting there at 137, I was absolutely shocked. I think you kind of hit the hammer on the head there. You know, just a really big athletic body, a guy who has kind of that nose tackle size, but he moves in ways that you wouldn't expect him to. Super physical, super explosive, just a guy who's really versatile, who can kind of play across the line. So I was pumped about that pick. And I think he goes to a really good position there where, you know, you're sitting behind two guys, but you can never have enough defensive linemen. And so to be able to kind of come in fresh and impact in that way behind those two guys, I think he's sitting in a really, really good spot. You know, the rumors kind of floated out there that he slipped due to injuries. So
Mhm.
I think, you know, you're at this point in time and you take the risk. And I think it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to meet. So this is another reason why you got to come down with us to downtown next year in Mobile. Josh's brother Tyler was out there, and so we got to talk with him for an extended period of time, and it was just fun being able to experience what like the family culture is like and everything. And they're good people. They're really exciting individuals. So I'm sure he did very well in those interviews. And then you bring up the frame, and even if there are some injury questions, I mean, the fact that he doesn't have to start immediately is really nice to make sure the body's fully back to full health. And then, I mean, of all people, Milton Williams is one to know how beneficial it is sometimes to sit and grow and develop as not the pure starter when he did behind Fletcher Cox. So I really do like the potential that y'all have there. And then 146. Braden Swinson was my favorite edge in the entire class. I know that he ended up falling per people who have inside information that because first off, there was some issues back at both Oregon as well as LSU, but he also didn't apparently interview well. He's someone who came on my show and he was great to talk to. Love the guy. I have nothing against him. I think that, you know, it was a little bit overblown, but the past is the past. That's the reason why he fell. But 60 pressures, 9 sacks in the SEC, over 33% true pass rush win rate. That's pretty badass if you ask me. What were your thoughts at 146?
Yeah, 100%. I think from a football on field standpoint, there is absolutely zero reason that a guy like Braden Swinson should be there in the fifth round. You know, for me, I think he was more of a late second, early third type of guy, you know,
Mhm.
midday two. So the value is incredible. And I think you walk away after those first four picks going all offense, and you're kind of expecting a little bit of a deficiency in terms of your young talent moving forward from a defensive standpoint. So to get Craig Woodson, Josh Farmer, Braden Swinson back to back to back, it really is the cherry on top. But again, like you said, just a really, really productive player in the SEC who has all the tools you're looking for from the edge rusher position. And, I think that is one of the things that the Patriots really were lacking. They have all those interior players. They have a guy like Keon White, who's a little bit bigger, who can play on the interior, but I do think they were kind of missing that pure edge rusher. So I think Braden Swinson definitely fills a need and has all the talent. When you look at guys who potentially have some off-field character stuff that people are monitoring, you want to look at, the infrastructure of your coaching staff and what is your organization going to do to support these players. And so I think now when you have a guy like Mike Vrabel in there who, players really do relate to, and he's respected by a lot of people in this league, and he does a really good job of connecting with his guys, I think that's an awesome position for a guy like Braden Swinson to come into.
What's funny is I do some writing for Garrett Football Analysis, YouTube's new website, and I was writing up an article about the biggest steals in the NFL draft. Ended up landing actually on Braden Swinson, so spoiler alert for the people who actually want to read those articles. But I was saying exactly that, where there's personality flare-ups, but I'm a Steelers fan. I know that with certain coaching types, I'm a lot more comfortable when we bring on those type of players. The head cases, if we can deal with them, we get the talent instead. Now, if you see one of those coaches trade away a player that might be a head case, I'm going to be honest, I've criticized them several times, but always ended up being wrong. So pray to God that Braden Swinson stays a New England Patriot for a long time. But yeah, excellently said. Next, we got Andres Borregales. I'm not a big guy for drafting kickers, so that's why I put it there. And if that's my least favorite pick of the draft, you see the grade. I don't like handing out A+. I'm a little bit of a tough cookie. I personally thought it's like, okay, you know what? Like, you can take it, you can leave it. What were your thoughts on Borregales? Because I'm not a big special teamer guy, but maybe you have a little bit better insight than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I do too much work on the kickers,
Yeah,
so
kickers
so
aren't
I
people
don't.
either.
Yeah, I don't have too much insight to give. But what I will say is, on day 3 at pick 182, you're usually not expecting to draft starters. Like, you're really just
Right.
throwing darts at a board, and so
Mhm.
I think if Borregales kind of came in and interviewed really well, and you really trust what he can do as a kicker, and you just have that conviction in him, to me, it's like, why not? But yeah, I do understand why taking a kicker there, just with the amount of volatility and fluctuation at the
Right.
position.
Right. So we'll just leave it there because, again, kickers aren't people. Kickers and punters, we do not care. But let's talk about my former classmate, Marcus Bryant, left tackle out of Missouri, formerly SMU. He's a fun player. Boy, he's about like 6'8". He has good arm length. Like, he's mobile. He is a bit too inconsistent, and that's the reason why he fell to 220. I mean, if he were a little bit more, you saw at pick 7 what happened with Missouri tackles, right? But Marcus has some really, really solid high-end reps. He's someone who I would dream to have as a backup swing tackle. I mean, high character guy, mobile, good build. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because you look at him in the polar opposite way of Will Campbell, where the dialogue around that was kind of the short arms. And
Mhm.
you look at a guy like Marcus Bryant, who's just absolutely flooded with tools. So I think it was kind of ironic in that sense. But yeah, like you said, when you're drafting in the 7th round, again, you're not expecting to draft starters. You're kind of looking for those high end traits that you as a coaching staff can really mold. And so, I mean, I don't really know what to expect out of Marcus Bryant. I don't know if he'll ever become something for the Patriots, but I think it's
Yeah,
exactly what you're looking for from a day 3 pick. And,
right.
at this point, with Will Campbell sitting there at the left tackle spot and, Morgan Moses presumably at the right tackle spot with Caden Wallace behind him for a couple years, you have time to develop a guy like this, and you don't really
Right.
need him to ever step in right away. So I think just to have the depth at such an important position and a guy with the high end traits to potentially develop, you can never go wrong with that on day 3.
I mean, you always need to have backup in the trenches anyway. Redundancy is so key at a position that could always get hurt too. Now, he's probably not going to be able to be a guard, but I'm curious when not Marcus Bryant, when Caden Wallace was coming out, I had some issues with him as a tackle based on like some spatial awareness stuff. And funnily enough, I think I had some similar issues with Will Campbell. Not saying they're the same remotely anyway, but I actually really like Caden Wallace as a guard. I thought that he actually ended up when he had a tight end next to him, he felt a lot more comfortable. Do you still see the potential for Caden Wallace to be that true starting tackle, or are you starting to lean a little bit more towards the guard route now that we've seen him a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually talked about this on a podcast a couple of days ago, I think. But I think he's probably going to stick at that right tackle spot. I think, you put him in a position last year where you expected him to move to left tackle and, he didn't really get the proper development he needed and he's never really had any experience in college at the guard position.
Right.
So I do think you have a guy there at right tackle right now who's such an incredible mentor in Morgan Moses where if you can kind of sit behind him for a year and just soak everything in and watch him there for 1 year and learn how to be a professional and really develop at the position that you've been playing for a while.
Yeah.
I think best case scenario, you potentially have your right tackle for a couple of years there. So I think you're probably better off just developing him in that route. But I do see what you mean. I think there's definitely a chance where if it doesn't work out, he is potentially a guy who could move inside. I just think that the Patriots are really flooded with a lot of mid interior
Pointers.
players right now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so I don't think he'll get that opportunity.
Fair enough. And then again, you now have similar to what we're talking about with Jared Wilson, who, I mean, he also is a really good athlete that has some inconsistencies. We're now seeing the veterans be able to take the early portion of the year at the very minimum, if not the whole year, and allowing these guys to develop with proper mentorship. Now, let's talk about Julian Ashby. He's a long snapper. I don't have very much analysis here. I don't know if you ended up studying long snappers. If you did, that's awesome. I did you?
Can't say that I
Yeah.
did, but when I was
Like,
asked my least favorite pick, it had to be that one. I
yeah,
just think, drafting a long snapper, especially when you had a guy who had been doing it for a long, long time, who was really a
yeah,
staple in that program, it didn't make a lot of sense. I think the one justification that I was able to maybe come up with was if that's a guy like Borregales, who I was kind of talking about before, is if that's a guy who really came in and just interviewed super well, and Mike
right.
Vrabel just feels like he's going to be the type of guy who's going to come in the building and kind of set the tone for other guys and work out super hard and just really have a good work ethic and set the example for other guys in the building, then I see why it's worth it at pick 251.
Right.
But if that's not the case, then it's a little bit of a head scratcher. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was looking at my phone to see like the different players that were on the board at particular times. Like Borregales, like there's not really anybody that would be crazily in that range where I'm like, what the hell? I mean, there's Cam Williams there if you want to develop a right tackle. I mean, like, but I was just like seeing, okay, well, I was wondering exactly why, because to be fair, is just because of that 182 instead of 251. But I was like, yeah, I mean, long snapper drafted is an intriguing one. Granted, the Patriots had good long snappers in the past, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that they're incorrect for that. And then last but not least, this is a player who I did not get to, Kobe Minor. Shout out to the admin for absolutely whiffing by set talking about A minor. But did you have any thoughts on Kobe Minor, or you ready to just jump into the UDFA's?
Yeah, so Kobe Minor was another guy who I feel like not a lot of people knew about. And
Right.
even, if you listen to Elliot Wolf's press conference after the draft, the way he was talking about Kobe Minor, it really seemed like they didn't have much tape on him in game. Like he hadn't
Mm,
played a lot of football, but they got an up close look at him behind the scenes in practice at Memphis. And the way
yeah.
he was talking about him was, it seemed like this draft pick was really all about the tools, just the movement
Mhm.
skills, the size, all of those things. And the way Elliot Wolf made it seem really seemed like this was just a pick based on practice and seeing
Hmm.
him behind the scenes and just seeing the way he moved. So,
Yeah.
I think another similar to Marcus Bryant, just another day 3 guy that you're kind of betting on the tools and hoping that your coaching staff has enough juice to develop him a little bit.
Fair enough. And I mean, the fun did not stop there. I'm looking at your UDFA class, and I'm going to toss a few names in here. Feel free to toss in some of your favorite as well. But you guys kick some ass in terms of the big names. Like Lan Larson was getting a ton of love and super duper fun. He was UC Davis back, correct?
Yeah,
Like, I
believe
mean,
so.
obviously, we're pretty limited in terms of being able to see some UC Davis tape, but the little that was out there, I mean, this guy was super fun to watch. It's another white running back for the Patriots. Got to love that as well. The culture, got to set the vibe. And no, but he was absolutely phenomenal there in the FCS. Tossing Efton Chisholm as well. I don't. Were you at the Shrine Bowl in Dallas?
I was not, no.
So, I mean, you gotta go to that sometime as well. It's super duper fun. It's a little bit more compact and like a little bit closer knit than the Senior Bowl that's like all spread out in a stadium. It's
Mhm.
really fun. But Efton Chisholm popped. I did not know who he was going into the event. And it just ended up being like this guy with this little red helmet, this little dude is just routing up every single DB. So the fact that he went undrafted, he didn't test out necessarily unbelievably. A little bit of a smaller guy. I get it. But definitely somebody that to me popped off right away. And when I don't know somebody and they pop, that's a player I like to give a lot of credit to. One other name I'll toss in before I'll let you go and talk about some other players that maybe I'm a little bit less informed on than you. CJ Dupre. I mean, really solid blocking tight end from Bama. Had some flashes of receiving ability as well, even after the catch. And underrated athlete. Honestly, I don't know if he's someone who would ever make a 53, but I mean, talk about a really good guy on practice squad to be able to get some good reps in, especially for the edge rushers trying to deal with the heavier run blocking tight ends. I really like what you guys got here. Might not be quantity, but there was a lot of quality.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think you kind of touched on all the UDFAs that, are getting Patriots fans going the most. The
Right.
reason I love the Land Larison and Efton Chisholm is just kind of going back to my point before of what I was saying with Travion Henderson and Kyle Williams is just the type of player that Josh McDaniels likes. You look at the running back position, he's just had so much success with those smaller scat backs who have that more developed receiving skill set. And so I think a guy like Land Larison who can really make his money in that way, Josh McDaniels can find a role for him and
Right.
really maximize his strengths and utilize what he's meant to do. So that is one that I think makes a lot of sense. And then similarly, if you look at the receivers that Josh McDaniels has typically had success with, it's a lot of route runners, a lot of slot guys, a lot of guys who can win, through the route tree. And so there was a time where, with Tom Brady, when your top two receivers were Julian Edelman and Danny Amendola, and those guys feasted, not
Yep.
because they were necessarily the biggest or the fastest, but because Josh McDaniels' system is really built on how well can you run the route tree? How well do you know the playbook? And so I think a guy like Efton Chisholm, who really has honed his craft, who can run the full route tree, who can create that separation, another really good fit there. So I'm excited to see those guys in camp. Another name that's kind of been buzzing a little bit around Patriots fandom is Brock Lampy, the fullback, I believe from Northern Illinois, I think.
Okay.
But don't know can't say that I watched this tape before the draft, but it's interesting to see, maybe the Patriots are going to want to get back to that ground game and kind of molding a little bit of the philosophy that Mike Vrabel brings from Tennessee and really,
Mm.
the way that he was able to get to the AFC Championship game behind Derrick Henry and really running the rock and, Josh McDaniels' schemes with running.
Right.
I'm excited to see if they get a fullback in the mix and potentially making the 52-man roster.
Dude, that was the Derrick Henry of it all made me believe that Ashton Genty might have been the pick at 4. I was always like, damn. I mean, most of like a lot of Vrabel's success went through how like a lead, a 3-down back. If you were to go back in time and change any of these picks for one of the other guys that were on the board, what would be the one that you'd go and do? Maybe you could flip 2 because like if you dropped Will Campbell, you'd probably draft a tackle somewhere else. But like, if you were to change one thing, what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough question just because I do
It's a good
like this
draft.
this
Yeah,
draft so
it's
much.
a good
And
draft.
the way that they read the board
Right.
worked out so well.
Yeah.
It's so tough. I mean, I want to say that I would just add Jalen Noel. Like they had
Right.
they drafted Kyle Williams. Jalen Noel, first of all, was like one of my favorite players throughout the whole process. So was Kyle
Right.
Williams. Like he was, I think Kyle Williams was like my 44th ranked player on the board, but
Mm.
Jalen Noel was actually in my top 30. So someone that I
Mhm.
really, really pounded the table for throughout the process. And,
Right.
they drafted Kyle Williams at 69. They had pick 77 where Noel was still available. So, I mean, maybe you stick there and you pick him. I guess you wouldn't have
Right.
Jared Wilson in that situation. So, I mean, it's hard to really critique this draft just because they read the
It's really
board
good.
so nicely, but I
Right.
definitely would have liked to potentially walk away with that.
That would have been fun. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about like 5'3" and an attitude. Like these guys are both like short but dynamic guys. But I did not ask anybody else those questions before. You were getting it off the rip. I just wanted to test out that theory. I actually really liked it. But thank you again for coming on. For all y'all who are watching, please go follow my guy Daniel over here at Scouted NFL. I mean, if you guys like my very little, like all 22 clips, you're gonna like his way more because he actually has them clipped together. my dumb ass, I'm just watching the tape and I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna click this. Like, I like this play. But for you, I think you do a lot better job. But thank you again, Daniel, for coming on. Feel free to say goodbye.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate it, and happy to come on anytime and talk ball. So thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys again for watching. We'll see you later. Peace.